Growing up, I was an avid watcher and lover of movies. I don't know if there's any other movie fans, movie buffs out there. There was something about, especially when I was a kid, going to the theater, getting popcorn and a Coke, sitting in that cool, dark room brightened only by the action on the screen, but it thrilled me. My first favorite movie was one that came out in 1977. It was entitled Star Wars. I remember seeing Star Wars as a boy, and my life was changed forever. It was magical. Any other Star Wars fans out there? 4 of you, good, glad, thank you. For those of you who have never seen Star Wars or have forgotten what the general storyline is, let me refresh your memory. Star Wars is the story of a group of intergalactic soldiers called stormtroopers. Now, you've probably seen pictures or clips from the movies with these guys. They're dressed all in white armor. They do things that space soldiers would do. They fight and they shoot and they fly in spaceships and they guard prisoners and they follow orders. So the whole movie is about how these guys do their job consistently and obediently, and then at the end of the movie, their space station is blown to bits and they're all destroyed. It's a tragic story. Another one of my favorite movies growing up was Rocky. Anybody see Rocky, right? Rocky, of course, is the story of a boxer by the name of Apollo Creed. So Apollo Creed is the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. The whole story is about how he has to work and train to face this no-name fighter from Philadelphia, but as a result of his talent and his hard work, he ends up winning the final fight in a split decision, and he retains the title. So that one's the story of triumph and victory. Apollo Creed defends his belt. That's the story of the movie Rocky. Or one that came out later, but is an absolute classic, another one of my favorites, Forrest Gump. You remember that one? It's the life story of a man who grows up in the mid-20th century in Alabama by the name of Bubba, correct. Bubba was born in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. He's born into a shrimping family from whom he learns all the ways that you can prepare shrimp. You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it. There's shrimp kebabs, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, pan-fried, deep-fried, stir-fried. There's pineapple shrimp, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp, shrimp soup, shrimp stew, shrimp salad, shrimp and potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it. Well, Bubba gets drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War and unfortunately loses his life overseas in battle. Sad story, sad ending. Forrest Gump. Did I get all that right? What did I miss? What did I leave out? In each one of those movies, I left out the hero, right? Star Wars isn't a story about the tragic lives of the stormtroopers. They are, in fact, just a small part of the movie. The movie is about how Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Chewbacca and Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Rebel Alliance saved the day. It's about heroes triumphing over evil and darkness. Everything in the story points to the heroes. Rocky is not a movie primarily about Apollo Creed. It's about Rocky Balboa, that no-name fighter who rises from obscurity to go the distance against a huge favorite. So it's a story about perseverance and resolve and hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Everything in the movie is about the hero. Forrest Gump, as much as you might love Bubba, is not about Bubba. It's about Forrest Gump, a little boy who overcomes obstacles, who grows up to achieve success in unexpected ways and unexpected places, time after time, influencing historical figures and even altering historical events. Everything in that movie is about the hero. You see, when you zero in on something minor and make it the main thing, you distort the whole story, don't you? When you leave out Luke Skywalker, Star Wars might as well be about stormtroopers. Without Rocky, that movie is not Rocky. They shouldn't call it that. When you leave out Forrest Gump might as well be about any number of minor characters. You take out the hero, you take out the struggle, you take out the triumph, and it's not even the same story anymore. Now, why have I chosen this morning, Easter Sunday morning, to talk to you about Star Wars and Rocky and Forrest Gump? Why am I talking to you this Easter Sunday morning about heroes? Well, here's why. What I just did in trying to explain the plots of 3 well-known movies is what a lot of people do with the Bible. What I did in making those movies about minor bit players rather than the hero, in making the story about secondary plot lines instead of the main theme, that's what many of you here this morning may have done with the story of the Bible. Let me explain what I mean. If you grew up in church, or if you spent any time coming to Sunday school or vacation Bible school or youth group, you are probably familiar with some of the main stories of the Bible. For instance, you probably remember the story of the Garden of Eden, right? The beginning of all things, how God commanded Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they did, and as a result, what happened? They got kicked out of the garden. And if you're anything like me, when I was a kid, what you took from that story is you better do what God says, even if it doesn't really make sense, even if the alternative is really tempting, and even if the devil is really trying to get you to do the wrong thing, because if you don't do what God says, he's going to get really mad and he's going to kick you out. So at its heart, the story for many of us was be good, be obedient, resist temptation, or you're going to get it. Maybe that was also reinforced by your parents. Maybe that was the story they wanted you to hear, right? But it was moralism. It's a story to get people to act right, to keep people in line. You probably remember the story of Noah and the ark. How God told a man named Noah, a righteous man, to build a giant boat because rain was coming. And how Noah built it, and he saved 2 of every kind of animal. And again, if you're anything like me when I was a kid, what you took from that story as a child was be persistent, even if you have to wait a long time, even if you don't know what's going to happen, even if people laugh and make fun of you, because the end, you get to ride on a floating zoo. No, actually, it was this. It was do the right thing or God is going to drown you. And again, it was moralism, a way to get people to act right, to keep people in line, a way to motivate people to make good decisions. You probably remember the story of David and Goliath, where the shepherd boy with a slingshot goes head to head with a professional trained giant soldier armed with a sword and a spear. And David, the shepherd boy, strikes down the giant with a single stone to the forehead. And maybe what you took from that story, and I've actually heard this preached and taught before, is even though you may be small and weak, when you come up against the giants of your life, that might be financial stress or marital difficulties or trouble at work, or difficulty with your kids, or temptation, or depression. When you come up against those giants, God will help you to defeat them. If you have enough faith, if you believe, God will help you conquer the problems of your life, just like he helped David conquer Goliath. So it becomes a story about personal success. Probably remember the story of Jonah and the big fish, where God tells this prophet, a man named Jonah, go and preach, but instead Jonah runs away, goes the complete opposite direction, and so God sends a storm to rock the boat that he's on, and then a fish to swallow him that takes him where he was supposed to be in the first place and throws him back up on land. And so the moral was always, don't try to run away from God, or he will send a fish to swallow you and take you where you didn't want to go to begin with. It's a moralistic story that it's easier to just do what God tells you the first time, right? Have you ever heard those stories and taken away those lessons? Now, what's wrong with looking at those stories that way? What's wrong with taking those lessons away from those events? Are they wrong? I mean, should we do what God says, like Adam and Eve failed to do in the garden? Absolutely we should. Should we obey God and wait patiently like Noah did? Certainly. Will God help us face difficulties in life, like he was with David when he faced Goliath? Sure he will. Does God want us to do what he says the first time? Definitely. But listen, if we read those stories and all we see is a historical account or an interesting character or a moral about how we should live, we miss the whole point, not just the point of those individual stories, but we miss the point of the whole Bible. If you read the story of the flood and think that Noah is the main character and that it's mainly a story about a boat and animals, it's like watching Star Wars and only seeing the stormtroopers. If you read the story of David and Goliath and think that David is the main character and that the story is mainly about helping us overcome difficulty in our lives, it's like watching Rocky and coming away thinking only about Apollo Creed. If you read the story of Jonah and think that he is the main character in that story, or that the whole thing is primarily about a fish, it's like watching Forrest Gump and remembering only Bubba. The garden is not about Adam and Eve and a snake and a piece of fruit. The flood is not about a man and a boat and animals. David and Goliath is not primarily about a shepherd and a giant and a slingshot. Jonah is not primarily about a prophet and a fish. Each of those stories is a small part of one great big story that begins at the start of time and continues up till now and extends even into eternity. And that one big story is all about a hero who comes and conquers evil and darkness. And if you miss the hero and you miss his fight and you miss his victory, you've missed the whole thing. So I want to share with you briefly this morning a story about two people who came close to missing the whole thing. The story is found in Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. I would invite you this morning to take a Bible so that you can follow along as I read. If you don't have a Bible or didn't bring a Bible, there's one there on the pew rack in front of you. If you don't own a Bible, please take that one with you. No one's going to stop and frisk you on your way out or grab it away from you. We want you to have a Bible, and so if you don't own your own Bible, take that one as a gift. But while you're turning there, Luke chapter 24, here's the setup. For 3 years, Jesus had been going through Judea and Samaria and Galilee, these three regions, preaching and teaching and performing miracles, and he has managed to collect a pretty notable following. But it all comes crashing down in 1 week as Jesus is betrayed, he's arrested, he's put on trial, he's sentenced to death, he's beaten, he's nailed to a Roman cross, he dies, and is buried in a borrowed tomb. But then, spoiler alert, 3 days later, unbeknownst to his followers, even though he told them repeatedly that it was going to happen, he is brought to life and he walks out of the tomb. He is risen. So this passage in Luke takes place on Sunday morning, so Resurrection Day, between Jerusalem, where Jesus was crucified and buried, and the village of Emmaus, about 7 or 8 miles away. So this is Luke chapter 24, beginning in verse 13. It says, that very day, two of his followers, were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? And he said to them, what things? And they said to him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sights. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Now, it's a pretty amazing story, as you can tell, but I want to zero in on 3 verses right in the middle. After these 2 disciples, these 2 followers of Jesus, recount for him all the events of the past 3 days, not knowing who they're talking to, Jesus, he kind of insults them by calling them foolish ones and slow of heart. That would be like if you explained to me everything that had happened during the week leading up to your wedding, or the 9 months leading up to the birth of your child, or some other milestone in your life, and in response, I just sort of patted you on the head and said, well, bless your heart. But not in the nice, understanding way, right? Like in the condescending, sarcastic, Southern way, right? But what's more important is what he says next. He refers to all that the prophets have spoken and says that it was necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory. And then Luke tells us that beginning with Moses and all the prophets, that is, beginning at the book of Genesis, very first book of the Bible, and working through the entire Old Testament, Jesus interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So these two individuals that were on the road apparently thought that the story of Jesus was just one more chapter in history. That his life was just one more example of a righteous man. That his death was just one more tragedy. But Jesus took them all the way back to the beginning of creation, the beginning of the universe, the beginning of history, and he showed them that the whole thing is about him. The whole story is about him. He is the hero. He is the main character. None of it makes sense without him. None of it fits together if every piece doesn't connect to him. And to be more specific, the whole story is about what he accomplished through his life, death, and resurrection. So what we are celebrating today, what we celebrate this weekend, Good Friday, Easter, the cross, the resurrection, that is the centerpiece of all history. It is the defining event of the universe. Take that away and it means nothing. I think that's what Jesus explained to those two people on the road to Emmaus. And it's what I hope that you see this morning. So let's walk back through some of those stories that I gave you a second ago. The story of the Garden of Eden. That's a story about sin entering the world and the punishment for sin being death. And so on the one hand, it is about the judgment of God against man's disobedience, but it's also about the promise of hope in one who will come and rescue sinners from that judgment. It's about God's love for his people and his plan to deliver them from sin and death. And how is he going to do that? By sending who? Jesus to obey perfectly where they had failed, to take their judgment on himself, and to rescue them through his death and resurrection. The story of the Garden of Eden is about Jesus. What about the story of the flood? That's about God's wrath against sin and his judgment against sinners, right? A bunch of wicked people. I'm going to send a flood to drown you. I'm going to save a few. But it's also about deliverance and rescue for those who trust in him. It was a picture of how Jesus would come and drink down the flood of judgment held in the cup of God's wrath as he hung on the cross, so that if we trust him, we might be kept safe in him, Jesus, our ark of safety. Through his death and resurrection, we're protected, we live. The story of the flood is the story of Jesus. The story of David and Goliath. It's about how God would send a hero to fight on behalf of his people when they were unwilling and unable to fight for themselves. Sound familiar? This hero would bring victory over the greatest of enemies. Jesus would come and live sinlessly for those who could not. And he would defeat sin and death through his crucifixion on the cross, and he would conquer the enemy by walking out of that tomb on the third day. The story of David and Goliath really is a story about Jesus. The story of Jonah, what's the story of Jonah? It's a story about God's unstoppable love for people and the lengths to which he will go to save them. It's about a messenger who spent 3 days in utter darkness before coming out alive to proclaim God's message of mercy and grace. Does that sound familiar? Jesus would fulfill that story through his death and resurrection. The story of Jonah is really pointing us toward Jesus. And I don't have time to go through the entire Old Testament and show you how every single part of it points either to our deep, desperate, hopeless, sinful condition and our need for rescue, or to God's promise and his provision of a Redeemer who would come and live and die and live again for us, But please believe me when I tell you that Jesus and his life and his death on the cross and his resurrection from the dead is what the whole story is about. The whole thing from beginning and end. What we celebrate today is what allows everything else that we talk about and teach about and believe to make sense. Jesus is the hero of the Bible. He is the hero of history. But I want to wrap up this morning by making it personal. You see, Jesus isn't just the main character of the Bible. He isn't just the main character of human history in a big sense. He isn't just the hero of the universe. He is the main character of your life. He is the hero of your very existence. And the question that's before us this morning is whether or not you will acknowledge him as king. Whether or not you will recognize him for who he is and respond rightly. Are you inclined to keep going on a path that is so natural for us, and that is to act as though our lives are first and foremost about ourselves and our wants and our needs and our desires and our accomplishments and our joys and pains and tragedies and triumphs? Will we be the star of our little bitty, minor, inconsequential story? And you're welcome to do that. Or are we willing to be the stormtroopers? Are you willing to play a small part, a small role in the big story of Jesus? I'm convinced that because of where we live, this Bible Belt, rural Texas culture that we live in, that far too many people have been fooled into thinking that as long as we give Jesus lip service, we're good. As long as we, quote, believe in God, we're fine. As long as we pray before we eat a family dinner, we've got nothing to worry about. As long as we pray the Lord's Prayer before a sporting event, then it doesn't really matter how we act on the field or in the stands. As long as we like it when somebody posts a Bible verse on social media, it doesn't matter that we then turn around and gossip or complain or slander someone in our very next post. As long as we vote for the candidate we think will uphold our moral values, we don't have to do all the other things the Bible commands us to do. As long as we've walked down a church aisle and filled out a card and prayed a prayer and got dunked, then we don't need to gather with God's people in any meaningful way for worship and fellowship and discipleship and ministry. We've given God a nod, and what we've done in those instances is made him a bit player in our stories. God's demand on us is that we recognize his preeminence over our lives. That we give ourselves completely, entirely, wholly to him. That we confess and submit to his lordship over us. That we acknowledge that our lives are not our own, that our time is not our own, that our money is not our own, that our possessions are not our own, that our plans are not our own, our families are not our own, our jobs are not our own, our futures are not our own, our rights are not our own. To believe in Jesus, to be a real, authentic Christian, a follower of Jesus, is to see yourself as small and needy and dependent, and to see Jesus as mighty and powerful and triumphant. To see ourselves as those deserving of death, and to see him as the one who conquered death. So where are you today? Are you the star of your own small, inconsequential story that may have some bright moments from time to time, but really, when it's all said and done, ends in tragedy when you take your final breath and the credits roll? That's it. If so, that's all you get. There's your reward. But if you are willing to give up yourself, your life, to be a small part of God's story, the reward is eternal and immeasurable. You can trade a brief, forgettable existence where you lose in the end for a forever life spent honoring and enjoying the one who made you, the one who loves you, the one who lived and died and lived again for you, the one who offers to make you new. Jesus is the hero of history. Will you acknowledge him as the hero of your life? If you'll pray with me.